So welcome, Nima.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Oh, that's almost too much. I thought about today, what would I walk you through if I were in your shoes right now? So I'm gonna share some stuff, but I don't want to just be speaking for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I want this session to be interactive, so I'm gonna ask some questions, and just please don't leave me hanging. Please answer the questions, because it won't be fun. But yeah, I'll go through a couple of things, and as Lasse mentioned, I've spent the last 10 years building products, and where I'm like specifically passionate is at like the 0 to 1. It's like the stage that most of you are right now, where you have to figure out, how do I get this thing off the ground? And then once it's off the ground, then you have to scale it and internationalize and all that stuff. That's usually where I start working on another product. So this is the part that I really love, because this is the part where you get like, everything is up in the air, everything can change. So you have to be very smart about the steps you make, because you only have so much runway, and you can only make so many good and bad decisions. So I'll try to walk you through like the 4 things today that are just based on me making a lot of mistakes the last 10 years. And you don't have to agree on all of them. Just think of it as a buffet. Like, take the parts you like, and then the parts that you might not be relevant for your startup, that you might not agree with, just ignore them, and we'll move on. So it's not the way to build product, but it's just ways that I found was really productive. The first thing I want to touch upon is research. So when it comes to research, what we usually do, and what I usually see founders do, I have a lot of friends that are founders, been founding a lot, is we do some research. We Google, we find some analysis, we look up some competitors. But if you haven't built your product, or if you are building it or have built it, the thing about research is you can really go above and beyond. So one of the things that work really well in the beginning is, just like you did and you mentioned, you have to go out and speak with people. And a lot of people are afraid of speaking with customers because you don't have a product. But the kind of how I would frame it is, you need to figure out who you're gonna sell to, but you have to take off your sales hat before contacting them, and then take on your researcher hat. And what I mean by that is, approach them with, hey, I'm researching in this field. Can I get 10 minutes of your time? And prepare some really thoughtful questions where you wanna validate your problem statement and your assumption and stuff like that. I haven't had like a 10-minute conversation that haven't lasted like almost an hour every time I've done this. It's just like, but if you say you're selling, it's like really hard to get through. No one wants to be sold to. That's the honest truth for very few people. And like a common mistake is, when you get these meetings, we can kind of help ourselves from, again, start talking about a solution. And it is incredibly important in those meetings that you do not talk about your solution. Just focus on validating the problem statements, figuring out, how important is this problem to you? What are you using today to kind of solve this problem? How much are you paying? I've gotten people to say how much they're paying, how much they would be willing to pay, what were the biggest problems if a vendor was on their way out, etc. Again, it's really tempting to start selling, but you should not sell in that situation. You just build a long-term relationship here. Because what's gonna happen is, essentially down the line, they will buy from you. But what you're interested here is having someone who can validate some of your assumption and give you some evidence. And we also have like a bias that's really important to keep in mind, or most of us, is we almost want them to confirm what we already believe, right? If they can tell you 9 things that should make you reconsider the direction that you're going in, but if you hear that one thing that supports the narrative, people tend to kind of have a bias to lean towards that, and it's only natural. So you have to be aware of that when you're doing, and be completely honest about it. Speak with users, as was already mentioned. The one thing that most people don't do, where you can benefit tremendously, is whatever you're building, there's most likely a competitor who have tried the same in the past, and they might have went bankrupt. Maybe not one-to-one the same thing, but their startup went bust. I guarantee you, if you reach out to that founder, you'll learn insights that you would never have gained otherwise. And you save tremendous amount of time and runway, essentially, because they can tell you where things went wrong, and they'll be happy to share most of the time. The same goes for competitors that are still in business if they get acquired. Like, you wouldn't believe how many insights I got from people who got acquired, actually telling me, what did it take to actually get to Series B in this industry? What were the key challenges they were facing? How do you actually grow within an account once you solve it? And so forth and so forth. And you can take it even further, and that is to actually interview the employees when they leave the companies in your space. That's also pretty common. And I'm not saying about like you should fish for confidential information. If a key engineer leaves at a company that we're competing with and he's been working on measurement and we can figure out measurement and he wants to talk about that, I'd love to hear how he just spent the last 2 years trying to figure it out. I have examples where people walk me through, we tried this and it didn't work, then we tried that and it didn't work, and we're like, all right, we're going to save a lot of time. That makes a lot of sense. But also where they're telling me, we're actually gone with this that you see is live, but I believe we should have done this instead, right? And you're like, wow, all right. That really opens up your eyes. Again, I'm not saying don't never fish for anything confidential. You just ask for their learnings and like what they would have differently if they could go back in town, stuff like that. And what usually happens is that people actually do this before they build the idea, but then once you build it, you stop doing it. But it's really important to set time aside because you're going to be extremely busy building your startup and you kind of lose touch on some key insights. I'll give you one example. The last week, I met with someone. I took 2 hours out of my calendar. She was an engineering manager who's exactly kind of profile we want to help and kind of be a decision maker when it comes to buying a product. I spent 2 hours with her at lunch. And the reason why I did that was that she was in a situation where she was so unhappy at work that she was leaving for another job. So this was like the most, obviously not optimal for her, but it was the most optimal situation for me because she would tell me everything that was wrong. What's not working in my company? What is making me take this drastic decision? And ultimately, our solution is about making managers happy and making them stay and retaining talent. So understanding why someone leaves is incredibly important. And I'll kind of give you 2 insights just to give you an idea of, and this is really the way I want you to think about it. You are out there collecting insights. You're not out there collecting your solution. So one key insight was from a pre-seed company that closed. And they basically told us, Nima, you can sell to a few customers, but once you want to grow their accounts, they're going to ask for, a proven way to measure this. And if you can't do that, you're not going to convince the decision makers to go from a deal that is maybe 10K to 500K, right? So we were like, when I got that insight, and we got the insight as a team, we're like, we have to think about this now. Like we have to actually think about how we're going to go about measurement in a scalable way. Our product is coaching. It's not like going to the gym. You can't measure, how much weight you lost. It happens internally. So it's like an industry challenge to solve. And again, that means you have to speak with people who works in the industry and is working on solving this. The other key insight was from a Series B competitor that got acquired. And I made a huge mistake because I actually didn't take this seriously enough. I got this quote like, what was it, Vala? When did we hear this? It was like 8 months ago or 7 months ago. So we interviewed someone who's like in the same industry, and she basically told you guys have an amazing idea. I'll guarantee you content is where you're gonna get killed if you don't figure it out. Because customers, they don't look at high quality content that you're delivering and they don't value it. They just expect it to be there. They expect new content to come every quarter. And my mistake, and it is 100% on me, is I didn't assign enough weight to this. I was like, we'll figure out content. Like, it can't be that hard. And then like, fast forward to right now, Vala, our CEO, she's opening door to customers who are literally, they want to buy our product, but we don't have the content, right? So we're just trying to figure out how can we do this as fast as possible. So we were kind of forewarned that this would happen. And this is why the insights are so important. And you might be sitting and thinking, do I really need to do this after I build my product? It seems like something you do pre-product. But as you can see, getting these insights really help you understand, what's going to happen around the corner, what's most likely to happen. And I'm not saying that you should act upon it, but you should at least have it in mind.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what made you not pay attention to that quote at the time when you heard it?
I did not pay attention because I was not experienced enough to actually assign the proper weight in the industry, right? I was busy just building the MVP, getting it out. So I was like, this seems like a later problem, right? And in hindsight, what I would have done differently, I would have focused way more on how do we create a process where we can kind of spit out high quality content, invest in the resources and the people needed and so forth. We're doing it now, but we're doing it now because it's a bottleneck on our revenue growth. Right? But we could have prioritized differently in hindsight. Yeah. So I think it's psychological to some extent because you have to kind of balance a lot of priorities at the same time. And you will make this mistake as well. There'll be some insights that you'll ignore and then it'll backfire on you. Yeah.
Can you open up a bit the term content here? Like you're talking about like, case studies and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, so we are in the learning and development space. So the companies, they expect to get material for the employees to learn and grow professionally. Yeah. In our case, it's coaching, so it's in an app. So you can imagine maybe a company says, I want to upskill my employees on relationship building, or I want to upskill them on communication or collaboration. But if they want us to upskill them in a certain area and we can provide that area, it might take us maybe a month or 2 months before we actually have built the quality, like the content at the quality that it needs to be. And to answer your question before, I was actually arrogant enough to think that the content that we created was good enough. What we figured out later on was it wasn't at the bar that it needed to be. So that's also part of the explanation. So as I said, I'm not that smart. Yeah.
So who is your customer? Company, or the company is your customer, but the users are the employees?
Exactly, yeah.
So have you interviewed both?
Yes, we have to. So we cannot be successful unless there's high engagement. So we have to make sure that the users love the product, and at the same time, we have to make sure that the people buying are getting the features and stuff that they expect, like scalable measurement, etc.
Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm just cautious of time, but stop me at any time if you have questions. I want to talk a little bit about metrics. The number one mistake that I made is I thought, and I've done this so many times when I started building product, was like, let's scope the MVP, you'll scope it down to the minimum requirements, and you'll leave out metrics. We'll do analytics in the next iteration. It's such a bad idea. Like, don't do that. I don't know if anyone has done it, and it's completely fine. I've done it several times, so I'm not that smart. But now what we do is, we make sure that, like, from the beginning, when we release the first version, we do have metrics. There is no right or wrong ways, but there are ways that are, like, more optimal in my opinion. You don't want to use stuff like Google Analytics, which basically shows you who's visiting and what pages are they visiting. You want to use something event-based where you can see what people are clicking on and how they're going through the flow. Some best practices that I would love to know when I started was pick a few metrics, not a lot, especially in the beginning. Usually it helps to understand where in the process do we create value and which are the steps before that process to understand where people drop off, like just basic stuff like sign up, output, input, whatever it might be. And once you decided on this metrics, it's important that you kind of evaluate what is my North Star metric. This is something that we also used at Google, where it's like, what is that one metric that kind of can withhold all of these metrics, right? For us, when users finish a session, our North Star metric is we ask them to rate the session from 1 to 5. 1 means that it's a bad session, 5 means it's a great session, and then you have a lot of things in between. And that's what we use because we know that's the last thing they'll experience, right? If they've gone to this point, they finished the coaching session. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, just go ahead.
Just thinking about the different stages, I understand the North Star metric in terms of, like, you want to have a quality session for your coaching, but was that also your metric in the beginning when you, or did you have more like usage-based metric in the beginning and then changed it, or has it always been the?
It's always been. So the reason why we don't or I don't prioritize usage that much is, like, my job right now is to, as fast as possible, create a product that people really love. Because if they don't love it, then when our customers demo it, many of our decision makers are the users themselves, so they were going to ask to test it before they make a buying decision, right? So the experience has to be really good, and then usage is kind of like secondary. We need usage, but it's not a priority. This was just to show the North Star metrics. So what you'll see here is, like, we did, and you don't have to use 1 to 5. Every product is different. You have to figure out what works for your product. We use, like, the 1 to 5 metric, and when we started using this metric in September, the average rating of a session was 2. Like, horrible, like really, really bad. Actually not bad, I would say it was mixed. Bad is if people don't get any value out of the product. We were actually seeing that people got value out of it, but there were so many things we had to fix, right? There were so many issues, but luckily, because we had the North Star metric, we could kind of backtrack and see where did things go wrong? Like, people started session, where did they drop off, etc., etc. And that is, like, the way we operate today, and I'll spend a little more time on explaining how we actually use this in a practical way. But what I want to kind of emphasize is make sure you have metrics, make sure you have one metric, or at least consider it, one that can kind of contain all of the other metrics. Some best practices, this has to be available to everyone in the team. use really good naming conventions so anyone who would look at it would understand what it means. I've been at startups where we used horrible naming conventions, and as we grow, no one understood what was going on. I remember like a 1-hour discussion because user registration didn't mean user registration. It meant that you just started the registration, not that you finished it. So a lot of people just messed up their job. So use like logical naming convention. Make sure it's available to everyone. Sometimes only a few people have access. I know you're small teams right now, but just accessibility is really important. Then the third thing is, and my CTO hates me, like I'm never gonna accept any compromises on frequency. You need a dashboard that is just automatically updated. I've seen this so often where you do like a quick hack and then it's manually updated. The reason why it's so powerful is you'll never know when someone is using your product and there's a useful insight. I can't tell you how many times I've seen something and I just scream to Vala, oh my God, this is happening. Run to the customer, like call that person. Or like, we fucked up, help me. I forgot the recording. So there's been like so many instances. If that only updated once a day, or I was depending on the admin to update it and whatnot, I would have missed those opportunities, and they made a difference. So good hygiene around your metrics is also important. It's something you should prioritize as part of your MVP. You can choose not to. I recommend that you do, but it's very useful.
Can I ask just a very stupid detailed question? If I get that right, the North Star metric was the quality of the session that the user had with your product, right?
Yeah.
So when do you ask the question to rate the session? Like, because people might churn before you ask the question, or if you ask too early, they don't know.
Yeah, it's really good, and they do churn before we ask the question often. Yeah. But then we have the event-based logging that we rely on, so we know that they logged in and they didn't start, or we know that they logged in and they did a few questions and then they thought it was like, that's not for me. So that's okay for us. We are like focused, like we do keep an eye on that as well. But you know, there's no right or wrong. We decided to do it in the end, and then we have a lot of other metrics that we look at for that kind of analysis. But we need something where our thesis is the higher this go, the better the product becomes and the better results we see. If we could, like we went from 2 to 4 in this period of time, and you can tell Vala who's sitting over there, see, when we were here, and this is 100% on me, it's not like Vala is opening doors to huge opportunities at C-level for like just crazy companies, like huge technology companies, they're willing to buy, then Nima fucks up the product experience and they have a bad experience and they don't buy. And that keeps repeating until you figure out how do you prevent our customers how do you prevent people demoing your product from having a mixed experience? So we almost say like we started a mixed experience. It's really hard to get people to buy the mix because they're already going to take a huge chance on you as a startup, and there are competitors that are mature, that looks like you and whatnot. So you can have like a mixed experience, right? A good experience definitely helps you. It helps the sales, but where you really want to go to is like the great experience. And we had a few of those where people come into the sales call and they're pitching us how wonderful this tool is. The other way around, when we were here, that's where they come in and like, yeah, I can see the potential, but... and again, I think as founders, it's really important to be transparent. Like I take full responsibility, and it's not about throwing me under the bus or blaming me or whatever. But I am accountable for making sure that when our customers try the product, they have a good experience and it helps Vala sell, not the opposite. Yeah.
Do you consider like who the person is who uses it in this? Because I mean, you might have like the wrong type of user giving you shitty feedback, right? I mean, who's not even supposed to like the product basically. It's not for everyone, right?
It definitely isn't, and I'm gonna get to that right now. I can answer it immediately. On the other one.
One about
yeah, sorry. I'll just answer it in the next slide, if it's okay.
Just very quickly, what are your favorite tools for collecting these metrics and then visualizing them?
So I'm a fan of doing it. This is not the right way, but we do it ourselves. So my CTO and I, we have like the database hooked up on a data studio. I think it's called Luca now. So we just have a connection there and we log and track everything ourselves. But it's just because we want it our way. We're a little bit weird. But there's like stuff like Mixpanel and a lot of like event-based out-of-the-box stuff. And if you're just a little technical, it's quite easy to set up. If you're not, then it's a nightmare.
Recommendation
Oh, there you go. I'm not affiliated with Mixpanel. It's just to answer your question, Rico. Like feedback, and this is also an area that is really important. Is like the most important thing you need right now. So the mantra that I have inside of my head is like every day that we don't get feedback is a day we don't grow as a company. So I see like feedback equals growth, because understanding, not even if we're this, like just understanding how people experience our product is so fundamental. We will have, to talk about the demos, we had examples where customers went into the tool, and because we had metrics and we had a dashboard that updated frequently, we could see, all right, they are having a bad experience. So we would go in and we were like, all right, the next session, they said in session 1 that the quality is not like, it's not challenging. So we would go in and edit the second session before they started it and made it more challenging. And they would like, oh, I'm sorry, I wrote challenging before, but actually it's fine. So it's like, that kind of shows you the creative possibilities open up once you have that sort of tracking and those metrics and that frequency in place, where you could actually respond to things as they're happening, which is really important as a startup. Yeah.
So now I'm trying to understand, when you say feedback, is it qualitative or quantitative? Because quantitative is not, you see a pattern or problem, a drop off or something, but how do you know what is the problem? Is it, do you then ask someone about it, or?
Yeah, so in the next slide, I'll explain it. But the thing is, the way we get feedback is that we know who our buyers are and we know who our users are. In our case, the users are people who work remote and hybrid, and there's a lot of challenges when you do that. So we coach them on those challenges. It might be, preventing misunderstandings in written communication, or it may be like, how can I be more effective in online meetings because I can't really feel people the same way that I can in person. So what we do is we have like beta groups, and we spend a lot of time on that. So we get like 50 people in our target group, and of those 50 people, we always expect half of them to actually become active, and we'll give them access and we'll monitor their behavior. So right now, as we're speaking, we have like a beta test with 150 people in it. So there's things happening all the time. And the advantage here is, to your question, is all of those people are in the target group. If I have people who are not working hybrid and remote and they're doing coaching on how to become better at hybrid and remote, they're going to have a bad experience. I'm going to waste their time. They're going to waste my time. So don't do an open beta, do a closed beta, and make sure you qualify people coming in. Make sure that they're the right people. The beautiful thing is, if you do that and you run the beta groups, and we run them in batches, so we do a group of 50, we run it for 1 month, then we close it off, then we run it again with a new group that is larger, is that you just have this crazy amount of data coming in, and it's gonna help you kind of remove all the rough edges in your product instead of using your customers as guinea pigs, right? So they're actually telling you what's wrong, and you can fix it before you give it in the hands of a customer, and that is extremely valuable. How do you incorporate feedback into your product? A lot of people say that, I'm just gonna show you how we do it as an example, just to answer your question from before. We always do these two things. What I say is we have a scalable collection of feedback, and then we have personal collection. So what I mean by scalable, and if you're not doing this, you should seriously consider it, is you have to embed in your product actually asking people either to rate your product or give you feedback. And if you love your product, this is going to be hard because it means you're going to ruin the experience a little bit. You mentioned before, where should it be? Should it be in the beginning? Should it be the end? What is annoying? But the thing I want to tell you is, we have like 300 lines of this is pure gold with ratings and people telling us exactly what we need to improve.
So it's kind of contextual.
Yeah, so we ask them to give a rating, and we force them to tell us what's working well and what isn't working well. And you'd be surprised by how many answer these questions. I've been in another startup where we couldn't do it in the product, so we did it in registration. After you registered, you had to answer 3 questions, sort of like, why is this an important problem for you to solve? Or what are you using today? Stuff like that. And but you'll do that at the expense of the user experience. But what you have to remember is the opportunity cost, because when you start with your MVP, you're going to be down here, right? So using the user experience as an excuse not to do this, it doesn't really make sense from an opportunity cost point of view, because what you're going to miss out on is all the information you need to actually have this kind of trajectory. So in our product, we always ask people to rate from 1 to 5, and we ask them to leave feedback in terms of what worked well and what had to be better. And it's okay to answer nothing. And as you can see here, this is pure gold, all of this. It's pure gold, because they are telling you exactly what's working well and what's not working well. But as you mentioned, it's not enough, because what context is actually behind this? So what we do is, with every single user, we try to set up a user interview. So we do like 30 minutes or 50 minutes. And in that user interview, it's really, really important, because there's one thing that's always happening, especially when you're a startup founder. People are excited about what you do. So instead of telling you about their experience, they're going to start giving you advice. So it's like, it would be really cool if you added this feature, or you should do like Duolingo or Momondo or whatever. What you need to do in that situation, you have to bring them constantly back. That's great, but what was your experience? If you have really good metrics, you actually know exactly what they did inside of your app. Like I told Vala, like last week I had a user interview where someone like, I love this, it's the best thing in the world, you guys are so smart, Coachendo for life. And I was like, that's great, but you logged in a few times and then you didn't log in anymore. Like, how come you stopped logging in? And then they're like, well, actually for me, like this part wasn't deep enough, or I was missing, I actually just came back for the research and stuff. And then you can like, you prepare for that meeting and you just keep them in that context of the experience. And I'll guarantee when you use interview, people will drift away. They'll go into that kind of advisor thing, and it comes from a good place. I'm not saying that people are doing it wrong, because they want to help you, but you're not interested in them suggesting what you should do. You're interested in understanding what is the problem. Why are you not using my product? Or like, what's working really well in my product? How did you as a person? Why? Like, don't tell me what needs to be done around the login. Just tell me, why didn't you log in? What prevented you from doing that? Yeah.
So do you design all the research yourself related to this, or do you use someone like a qualitative data analysis person to do all that?
Startup, yeah. And I think you have to do it as I recommend doing it yourself as a founder, because the stuff that I get, like I can connect it to everything, right? As a founder, because I know our entire business, I know where we are. Sometimes I'll be like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm starting to like our solution is on a phone. And as I said, this is just like a small fraction of the user interviews. Every user interview is stored. You always start with a few bullets to whoever is reading it in your founding team, which is like, this is what I learned, like the key things, because people don't have time to read like 3 pages of notes. Or Vala has, but she doesn't have time, but she does it anyway, which is lovely. But I usually put bullets where it's like, this is where things went wrong, this worked really well. I'll give you one example. We had some users who are really highly engaged, but are not happy. So it doesn't make any sense. And then we start learning that at the beginning of each coaching session, I spend tremendous amount of time when we're building on research and finding like one golden nugget. Like something you could share over the dinner table at home and be like, did you know this? So these people just came back for that, right? But it's a very interesting observation, because it meant we had something that could get people back. But once they got back, the remaining part wasn't good enough for them. So that's the kind of stuff you learn. So as you rightfully said over there, what was your name, by the way? You both were really good. Yeah, this over here, like you have to understand the context, and you do that by interviewing people, and as many as possible. Like I spend at least 4 or 5 hours a week trying to schedule these and setting them up and conducting them and transcribing them. But again, like some people would say you shouldn't spend time on that. We're like super busy with other stuff, but we need to do it because we can't grow without of this information. This is just like, imagine this is like less than 5% of what we got in the first feedback stuff. Be more specific, involve more media. What models are used? A lot of this doesn't make sense unless you do the user interviews. But what does make sense is that you can start to see patterns, right? You'll be like, wow, there's a lot of people complaining about this. And because you have the metrics, you can also segment the feedback and be like, high engaged users, they're complaining about the same thing as low engaged users. So if we do this thing, it will impact everybody, right? So what we do is we try to make sense of it. And once we made sense of it, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, we start iterating. This is also the way we worked at Google, and the interesting thing about this way of working is it's a little bit counterintuitive if you worked in corporate. So in corporate, you build a roadmap. Many of you have a roadmap, I assume, or you have some idea of a roadmap. And you execute on the roadmap, you build a feature, and you go to the next one. What you have to do differently here is once you have all the feedback that I just talked about, you have to identify what are like the 2 or 3 most important bottlenecks for you to solve for your business to succeed. Right, so when we did a demo, I lost a huge clients that they were like slam dunk, huge opportunity. They tried the product, it was mixed, my fault again, full responsibility. But like Vala is amazing. So one of the things we looked at there, like what was it? And what we found out was that the thing that customer struggle with is the same thing that our users are reporting their struggle with. And we cannot close customers until we figure this out. So when we iterate, what we do differently is we just say, and these are just examples, what are the 3 biggest problems we have to solve? And then and it's very important to understand it, we don't know how to solve them. So we have to think about iterating as experiments. What kind of experiment are we going to kind of conduct to see if we can solve this? Because if you just say, oh, we'll do this, and then you'll build it, and then you'll go to the next thing, and you just actually haven't solved it, or you haven't solved it effectively enough. So sometimes you'll solve stuff, but you'll solve it like 20% of the users. You have to make sure you actually remove that bottleneck. Here are some examples. I'll try to explain the context if it's confusing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do after onboarding. How would you go about that? Like, how would you think, what kind of experiments would be useful to conduct?
On like guide tips, I highlighted buttons we have to press or something.
Yeah.
Like a video?
A video, yeah.
Someone explaining.
Yeah, what's next? Yeah. Anything else?
Even tighter and longer, like an onboarding, or like so that you don't land in like basically an empty canvas style of like having like a no way where to go, but like having it.
Yeah. Today, when you finish onboarding, you just left off on the homepage with just information. So this is like 3 problems we're facing. They're not the 3 most important ones, but as you mentioned the video, and you mentioned like the tie-in, and like you also had like a great idea of how to kind of move it further. You come up with experiments. The harder the problem is, the more research you have to actually, and time you have to spend on how to figure out. Because the harder it is, most likely the harder it will also be from an engineering point of view. And you have to make sure that your experiments are you have some easy experience and you have some that are more hard in terms of time and resources. Because you won't get it right the first time, very rarely. Sometimes you do if it's very easy. I use my laptop for work and my phone to relax. How would you solve that? That's what a lot of users are telling us. They're using our app for coaching on the phone. We have an app that's a whole positioning.
Make a web app.
Make a web app. Yeah.
Well, if it's only one person, I would disregard it.
Yeah. So these 3 things are like common patterns, things that we should take seriously. So what people are saying, what we're seeing is that a lot of people get distracted and then come back, and a lot of people are struggling to finish. A lot of people don't get into that deep reflection mode. And when we speak with them, usually they'll mention, I'm in the sofa with my phone, and then my kid, and then my dog, and whatever. And like my phone is really where I do entertainment or read news or short and snappy stuff. So I'm not really in that environment. And then when we ask them, they say, well, laptop is where I'm productive. That's where I do my work. That's where I go deep, and I'm in my office. So I'm not saying that we should like pivot to a web app, but a web app would definitely be an experience worth conducting. Yeah. And then to see, because, and then the last one is, I know what to do, I just don't know how to get it done. So we have exercises inside of the app where we do an exercise where we identify, for you personally, it would make sense for you to ask for feedback from some colleagues. Here's how you can go about it. Now go do it and have fun. And they're like, I'll do it. But then they won't do it. So how do you, like, and this is a literal quote from a customer. And it's something we see a lot. Like, how would you go about figuring out, like, what kind of experiments could you conduct to solve this one?
More nagging notifications?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Gamification?
What kind of gamification?
Some sort of reward, or like people get really, some people are hyped by visibility and some people are hyped by benefits. Depends, I guess, on that.
Yeah, really good point.
Just a simple confetti when you're done.
Oh, we have confetti.
Yeah, because that's the simplest reward.
Always a glitter bomb.
I'm not joking, we have confetti in the end, so.
Yeah, and simple confetti in our tool for a while.
Nice.
There you
I
go.
love putting things from cello in done just because I want to see more confetti.
Any type of motivation to give that small endorphin boost
Mm.
when they complete something.
Yeah. So, but you know, there's many ways to think about this. But like this one here is really hard because people do it in different ways. Think about if you have work you need to do that you get assigned on your computer and you have to do it in the real world. How do you actually get it done? That is very individual, right? Or maybe there's some. Yeah. Sorry.
That's a calendar invitation. You send. You book it in my calendar.
Yeah.
That's how you get me.
I'll spam you with text messages. But again, this is what I mean when you have. Yeah. Sorry.
Could it be that like you are segmenting your beta who in terms of customer profile who starts using it? Maybe for conversion, you also need to have like that target, like you say that different people do it differently. You can't like get everyone to do the same way, but you can experiment with different ways that might work for most, and then you look into the next segment. Like for example, like notification spamming might not work for me. I would probably turn off the phone and never use it. But it might work for him.
Yeah.
So who is the most user that you have, and kind of like experiment for them first, and then see.
Yeah.
That could be like
That's smart. So sort of like a multiple choice, asking them what do you prefer, how do you go about it. Yeah. That's really smart. That's very personal. Yeah. Sorry, like we have.
You're saying something like.
Go ahead.
Much, but I was such interviewing the ones that actually keep up with the pace, because they probably have some habit or a thing that keeps them going, and maybe you can like bring that forth in the other groups as well.
Yeah. So it's like tying it back to the research part in the beginning. Like you have to continue doing research, even though because that's part of solving hard problems.
Yeah, and then without.
Yeah. Sorry. Just go ahead. Like
It's just interviewing the people who don't go about it, because otherwise you get the survival bias. Like then you're focused on fixing the problems that aren't an issue actually. We need to focus on the problems that don't appear to be a problem at first.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I suppose without knowing much
Yeah.
the context
Yeah.
of what's actually happening here, like you could look into if the person knows what to do, is the task that needs to be done just too big or too long, or can it be cut into smaller snippets?
Yeah.
And then track that progress instead.
Exactly. So as you can see, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm maybe not related to answering this. I have a question for you. Is like when you're iterating, how do you prioritize? Because I'm guessing like when you're building iteration, it's always like, should whom do you please first? Existing customer, new customer, problem that I get to be solved. So how do you prioritize?
So the reason why I point at Vala is because you know how ruthless I am. Like she can literally not get anything through when we're prioritizing. The thing is, like once we've chosen like the 2 or 3 biggest problem, I don't care about anything else, because we did the analysis, the research, and we understand this is what we need to kind of grow. I want to show you this next slide to kind of explain it. This is how we started at an average rating of 2. Then we did beta testing. So the first thing we did was we looked into UX, which was the easiest thing to do, where people said, it doesn't feel like a human, it feels like a robot, or where are this and where are this, and la 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 la. So we just made it really easy to use, really easy to get started. And once you do that, the way you know whether or not you have succeeded on an experiment is that people stop giving you the same feedback again, right? So I show less in some more updates. I go like, look at these, like this insane amount of people complaining about not getting tips or advice and research. 2 weeks later, we come in and it's like, now people are complaining about this thing. Like, they complained about numerous things, but it's like, we solved it. But I want to make sure that everyone understands it's super hard, because Vala, on the other hand, obviously want us to progress from the problems, because there are more important problems that arise. But as long as there's nothing that is more important than these 3 things, we're completely ruthless with prioritization. Like, I won't even look at anything else, because this is what's going to give us the nice jump, because once you figure out, the rating goes up. The second time around, what we had to figure out was the stuff we talked about before, and that is like people would use it and they would leave. You mentioned before, sorry, I don't remember your name. He's deep in his work, yeah. Yeah, you mentioned before, what do you do when people drop off before the rating? that's really what we focused on here when engagement. We had like progress bar, notifications, and we got a lot of things wrong in our experiment. There's a lot of things that fail, and it's very frustrating. I'll give you one example. We know we cannot read our users' conversation. That's private, it's encrypted, it's confidential. So I don't know what people are writing, but the people who give our consent, what we can to read it, is the longer replies they write, the more engaged they become. The more people stick. That's a common pattern. People who write short answers, they're not engaged. Like something is wrong. They're not taking it seriously. They're not getting the full value out of it. So I went to those and I was like, what's happened? Why are you not writing anymore? And I went to those who wrote a lot. Why are you writing a lot? And so people told me, well, I don't feel comfortable and safe sharing this. It's about work. What if someone reads it? What if you read it or my employer reads it? So I did like 2 or 3 weeks where we just implemented experiment after one each other, where I said, in the onboarding, here's like how we store the data. It's encrypted. Like you could test. Like we went, and there was like small ticks. Like people were still complaining. Like, and I could still see it. And then I did some research, as I told you before, because research doesn't stop just because you launch. And we went and spoke with some coaches, Vala and I, and the coaches said, hey, and he was almost laughing. Do you know what I spend half of my time on a coaching session? I was like, no. Like, I asked people a follow-up question. Can you elaborate more? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And he's like, doesn't matter who it is. I was like, are you kidding? So I went back to Fran, our CTO, and I was like, I think an if statement just says if someone answers with less than X characters in a question like, and what would you do differently? We expect people to reflect. If they answer with less than, like, I think I don't know is equal to 12 characters, depending on how you write it. So it's like, if they do that, then we ask them, can you elaborate a little bit more? And I shit you not, it went through the roof. I can't show you the examples because I only have consent to read it myself. But it was stuff like, so why aren't you happy at work? It's just not fun anymore. Well, I don't know. And they were like, can you elaborate more? Well, most of my colleagues left, and they haven't really hired anyone since. I have a lot of workload on my shoulders, and I'm not getting paid anymore. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? I've done like 3 weeks of hardcore experiments, and all I needed was just like, can you elaborate more? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And it just goes to show how important it is to continue, because I could have stopped and said, people wanted to feel safe for sharing, and we solved that. Like, and they're still complaining, well, we can't go further than this. But I wasn't solving the right problem, right? Like I was approaching it in the wrong way. And this is content, and this is the last slide, and then I'm done. And we can do questions and stuff. So you can see when we did the engagement, it went through the roof, it stabilized. We're looking at week over week here. So in reality, it's going like this, but it's trending upwards. After doing engagement, this is where I realize we're losing too many deals. And as I said before, Vala is just incredible. Like, as doing startup sales is so hard, and she just keeps opening doors to these opportunities, and I just keep messing it up. So I was like, how can I make sure that, how can I sleep at night, basically, knowing that someone is using our product and having a good experience, because the mixed experience just won't work here. And what I found out was like everything came back to that unique insight in our customers, they like the quality, but we were falling through the cracks too often. And you experience this in your tool. There'll probably be stuff or software where people have expectations and they're not being met. So I had to understand, what does it mean to create quality content? And I'm so glad that Vala is not here right now, because she would go bananas. I told Vala, this is the most important problem of the company. I'm going to sign off for a month, and I'm going to figure out how to solve this. And I just disappeared for a month. Not literally, but I just went into this. I didn't read any updates. I didn't attend any meetings. The only thing I wanted to understand is, what is high quality content? And then once I understood that, I came back. I got the team together. I was like, I have a recipe. I read all the feedback on content. These are the things. Let's try out this formula. I showed it to Lasse. Lasse gave me some feedback as well. And we implemented this formula. And then once we implemented the formula, that's the first time, we weren't having any bad experiences anymore. We weren't having any mixed experiences anymore. Yeah, go ahead.
What did you do for 1 month to figure this recipe out?
Oh my God. So basically with the formula, it was like, people were complaining about so many different things about the content. So introduction was not clear. I wanted to be prepared. people were like having crazy good sessions where they realized things about themselves they didn't know, and they were like, yeah, I rated 2. Like, what? Like, why are you rating 2 out of 5? You just had like a transformative insight. And they're like, well, I didn't get any tips or advice. So in every session, every session follows a logic where I know that this is what people actually want. And a lot of coaches got angry with me, like disappointed, because they're like, this is not coaching. I was like, well, in order for us to coach them, we have to actually smoothen it. Like, we have to actually make it digestible for them. And that's a compromise you're going to find yourself having to do, where you have to say to yourself, I think this is the best experience, but people just want something differently, right? So we have to change it a bit. And I had a long argument with a coach who was like, coaching is about finding the answer within yourself. I was like, yes, we're still doing that, but we're helping them a little bit. And they're like, you can't do that, that's not coaching. I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like if they're happy, if they realize they had a good coaching session, that's great. So this slide kind of condenses everything I tried to get through today, which like have good metrics, have a North Star, have beta users, do a lot of research, like and the hard, like you don't have to work like this. You don't have to do any of this. It's just what I found to be most effective for our team, and most importantly, identify problems. Don't make a roadmap where you just assume you're gonna solve things, because you're most likely not gonna solve it the first time around. There are exceptions depending on how easy it is to solve. If someone's saying the login button is not working, then probably you shouldn't experiment too much. But on like the bigger things, try to identify them. The thing is that as founders, like when we're inventing stuff, we don't really know, especially if you're building something that doesn't exist or you're doing something in a new way, we don't really know what we're building. Like we are kind of, figuring it out along the way, even though we have a vision. So you saw before, this is just to give you an example, we are like positioning mobile. You can use coaching anywhere, anytime. But we have to actually consider now that for our users to get, to a deeper level, we have to experiment a little bit and see if making it available as a web app, and doesn't mean excluding it on the phone, but just making it available on the web app, how are people going to engage with it, right? Because what we experience now is that once we hit the 4 rating, and that's what I'm talking when I talk about product market fit, we don't have it, but interesting things are happening now. People are sharing on LinkedIn, I did this great session, it was awesome. I had one guy who was a beta user, and this is the advantage of using beta users in your target. He texted me, it's like, I'm working at Deloitte, I love this tool, I went to my manager, and manager is going to HR, we're trying to see if we can buy it for my team of 40 people. I was like, can you wait for me? I just want to give you some sales collateral. No, I already told them. Like, oh, fuck. So we don't have product market fit, but this is our North Star metric, and my assumption is the closer we get to a 5, the more of these kind of signals and signs will appear in the process. So I'll round it up now because I do have another very important meeting to attend. Any questions? We do have time for questions. No, yeah.
So obviously in a startup context, we don't have departments, right? We have people in charge of things. But whose responsibility should it be to have this information in their heads? Obviously you're in charge of the product, right? Yeah. You're also in charge of research. But that's not necessarily how people's capabilities align in every company. So somebody needs to either learn it or
you have to figure it out. Yeah. That's the truth.
But who should it be? An optimal?
Someone should sell the product and someone should build it, and whoever's built it has to. You can't build it if you're not doing this, and you don't have to be the best at it. I've done it for many years. That's why I'm kind of sharing some of my best practices. But it's natural. The only thing you have to, and that's like a common issue, is like people can't stand but talk about the solution and stuff. Just be quiet and ask questions and do like proper prep before. What kind of questions do I need to ask this person based on their behavior for me to get some insights? That's cool. Any other?
Yeah, like I said, you need to go.
I need to run.